Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump's latest outburst on Truth Social, apparently reversing the decision to half-fund the SNAP program by announcing today that, quote, SNAP benefits, which increased by billions and billions of dollars manyfold during crooked Joe Biden's disastrous term in office, will be given only when the radical left Democrats open up government, which they can easily do, and not before. Joining us to discuss callousness being trumped by cruelty, as 1 in 8 Americans, many of whom are children, face hunger, is Marion Nestle, Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies and Public Health Emerita at New York University. She holds a PhD in molecular biology and an MPH in public health nutrition from the University of California, Berkeley, and formerly served as a senior nutrition policy advisor in the Department of Health and Human Services. In 2023, she was awarded the Edinburgh Medal for Science and Society, and she's the author of Eat, Drink, Vote, an illustrated guide to food politics, and her latest book is What to Eat Now, the indispensable guide to good food, how to find it, and why it matters. Then, with elections today in Virginia, New Jersey, New York City, and California, we'll look into the retention election in Pennsylvania going under the radar for the state Supreme Court, in which a billionaire, Jeff Yass, is trying to unseat 3 Democratic judges in order to deadlock the court to later bring about one-party plutocratic rule. Joining us is Ryan Cooper, senior editor at the American Prospect and the co-host of the Left Anchor podcast, as well as the author of How You're Going to Pay for That, Smart Answers to the Dumbest Questions in Politics. And we will discuss his latest article at the American Prospect, The Republican Plot to Turn Pennsylvania into Hungary. Then finally, we'll speak with Dr. Ashley Koning, who is the director of the Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling in New Jersey and a professor in the political science department at Rutgers University. Dr. Koning has authored several book chapters, including one in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Political Decision-Making. She also serves as the education chair for the American Association for Public Opinion Research Executive Council and previously served as the president of their Executive Council. And we'll discuss how the Mamdani race in New York City and the Mikey Sherrill race in New Jersey are the personification of the struggle within the Democratic Party. And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now is Marion Nestle, the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health Emerita at New York University, which she chaired from 1988 to 2003. She holds a PhD in molecular biology and an MPH in public health nutrition from the University of California, Berkeley, and formerly served as the Senior Nutrition Policy Advisor to the Department of Health and Human Services. In 2023, she was awarded the Edinburgh Medal for Science and Society and is the author of Eat, Drink, Vote, an illustrated guide to food politics. And the latest book is What to Eat Now, the indispensable guide to good food, how to find it, and why it matters. Welcome to Background Briefing, Marion.
Oh, glad to
Nestle.
be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And the idea that 42 million Americans, 1 in 8 of our citizens, are facing hunger. We're no longer talking about good food. We're talking about any kind of food. And in the richest country on the planet, it's just so hard to take. And, two judges have weighed in and said the government has to stop holding up the SNAP, the food stamps program. Trump has sort of suggested, or the Republicans have suggested they'd fund it for 50%. So, in other words, you get a half a loaf. But now on Truth Social, Trump's even suggesting that it's not a good idea to do SNAP at all, and he still wants to hold it up until the Democrats open up the government. So, do you know where we stand now?
Not just Democrats. I mean, the way they're talking about this is the radical left Democrats.
Right.
I mean, I haven't heard language like this since the McCarthy era. The Trump agenda has always been to get as more people off of SNAP as could possibly be there. Republicans view the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program as a welfare program filled with fraud. It's a handout to people who don't deserve it. And they just think that this program is a boondoggle, when in fact it's a lifeline for a very, very large number of people who, in our inequitable society, don't have jobs that pay well enough for them to support their families. Most people on SNAP are working. They just don't get paid enough to be able to meet their needs, especially since the cost of housing is up and the cost of groceries is up, if you haven't noticed this lately. So, this is the first time this has ever happened. It's quite shocking. Long-time government watchers are just appalled that poor people would be used as pawns in the government shutdown. I mean, it's something we've never experienced before, where the ruling parties are using the poor as pawns. It's just shocking. And the rhetoric about it is just shocking. Left wing ideology. Democrats are equivalent to communists. I mean, I really haven't heard anything like this since the 1950s. I thought we were past that.
Well, indeed. And Trump put out on Truth Social today at 11:06 a.m. Eastern Time that SNAP benefits, which increased by billions and billions of dollars, manyfold during crooked Joe Biden's disastrous term in office due to the fact that they were haphazardly handed to anyone for the asking, as opposed to those in need, which is the purpose of SNAP, will be given only when the radical left Democrats open up government, which they can easily do and not before. Thank you for your attention to that matter. So, of course, what people don't seem to understand is that prior to this cutting off SNAP benefits, in the big beautiful bill that passed, and the one and only bill that Trump lumped everything into, uh, they cut 186 billion out of SNAP. So they've already eviscerated the bill itself. So what's being paid out now is a fraction of what was paid out before. So you've already had austerity. Now you're having cruelty on top of austerity.
Well, it's as if poor people are poor by choice. I mean, this reminds me of the English poor laws of the 1600s, which is what started all of this, when a charity for the poor was given under the idea that the poor were poor by choice, that if they just went to work and weren't so lazy, they wouldn't need handouts. And so you want to provide handouts in such a way that you keep people from starving on the streets because that's embarrassing and doesn't look good. But you don't want to give people enough to become dependent. And the idea that people on SNAP want to be on SNAP or are on SNAP for fraudulent reasons has been shown over and over and over again by research not to be true. The level of fraud is extremely small. It certainly exists. And there's also no question that SNAP is a very expensive program. roughly $80 billion a year to provide a food allowance to roughly 49 million people, of which 16 million are children. Are we going to let children starve in this country? Or the other idea is that private charity can make up the difference. It cannot. Food banks are really hurting. They don't have enough supplies to meet the need. Are we going to go back to what it was like during the pandemic with huge, huge lines in front of food banks and food running out? I mean, this is a terrible system. What we really need is universal basic income in this country. So we don't need to worry about these things, but that's politically impossible right now to even think about. We had it during the pandemic, it worked.
Well, there is a contrast, of course, with the New York mayoral race, where Mamdani, who is obviously very charismatic and is likely to win big, he's talking about city-run grocery stores. So there's at least an alternative to Trump's cruelty being offered out there.
Well, maybe that's why people are voting for him. I mean, it makes sense. If you look at what's happening in the economy, the level of inequality has gotten wider and wider and wider. The rich are very rich, and it's not trickling down to the poor. And people are beginning to realize this and get increasingly upset about it, as they absolutely should. And the idea that, you know, SNAP is an entitlement program. Congress, when it passed the food stamp legislation back in 1964, and in later enactments, made it an entitlement. If you're poor, you get a handout from the government. You get help with your groceries from the government. And all you have to do is prove that through means testing, and by the way, that means testing is not simple, it's very, very difficult, and in some states it's almost impossible. Um, you're entitled to it. This is an entitlement. This is what we do for people in this country because we are all citizens together. And the idea that you would punish the poor for being poor, really, we should be beyond that.
Well, but the contrast to 1 in 8 Americans facing hunger compared to Trump and his billionaire buddies tearing down the East Wing to build
Yes.
a ballroom that's going to distort forever the White House, throwing the whole building off balance by this great white elephant that will be haunting us through the ages as a tribute to Trump's ego. And every billionaire's name is going to be on this building. And then he has this a great Gatsby themed party down in Mar-a-Lago over Halloween, which just really again has this sort of Marie Antoinette quality to it. I'm wondering the extent to which the American people see this contrast between the ostentatious and outrageous sort of profligate behavior of the billionaire class compared to the suffering of 1 in 8 Americans, many of whom are children.
Well, it's very hard to sort all of that out. I mean, one of the great mysteries to a lot of people is why people voted for Trump when it was against their best interests to do that. And there are complicated explanations for that, having to do with a lot of anger about the federal government and people feeling like they've been left behind, which a great many people have. Poor people don't vote to the same extent as rich people do. So maybe the threat of people voting against Republicans is not viewed as threatening as it might be. But to me, the level of cruelty involved in this and stupidity, it's not just the poor who benefit from SNAP. It's local grocery stores. It's local businesses. People are embedded in communities, and if they have money to spend, it benefits absolutely everybody. There isn't anybody who loses when poor people have money to spend. And why that isn't seen is surprising. I mean, grocery retailers are in favor of SNAP dollars. They bring in that SNAP accounts for a significant fraction of their income. Food companies benefit because people are buying their products. I mean, to me, it just makes no sense at all. And it's not that much money. It's a lot of money, but it's not that much money. There are lots of other things that the government spends money on that doesn't have as widespread effects as SNAP has. SNAP benefits everybody. And if you've got people in your community who are eating well and are healthier and their kids are better off, that's good for everybody. We're all in this together.
Well, I don't know where we're heading, do you? Because Trump's thrown a spanner in the works with this angry post that he's had out on Truth Social. And is he going to follow through on his threat, which would be a violation of the federal court order demanding that the government fund SNAP? And it looks as if there was a sort of horrible compromise where we'll just give you half of what you want, what you deserve and need. But now Trump's more or less saying you're not going to get anything until the Democrats open up the government. So, do you know where we stand?
That's where we stand. I mean, Trump has to win. That seems to be the way that he functions. And so there has to be a compromise forged in this that makes it look like he wins. I don't know how they're going to do that. But we don't have a rule of law in this country anymore, and that worries me a lot. It's not just a question of where's our democracy, it's a question of where's our rule of law.
Well,
That for one thing, the Hatch Act prevents federal employees from making partisan statements, and yet the President of the United States is making partisan statements. The Secretary of Agriculture is making partisan statements about the terrible leftist Democrats. I can't even say it with a straight face because it's not my idea of leftist. But, I mean, this is leftist baiting, it's red baiting. It comes right out of the McCarthy era, and it resonates politically, but it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong, and it's dangerous. And I wish that the legal system could stop it.
right. Well, the irony is, of course, a lot of Democrats wish that their party was more to the left.
Indeed.
So,
Yes,
so
indeed.
if only it were true that they were full of radical leftists. So, but again, I'm absolutely confused about what's about to happen. But if Trump violates the judge's order, which is what he's more or less saying now, what would the next step be? They'd have to hold him in contempt.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, right. That's not going to happen because he runs the Supreme Court.
right.
So we don't have a rule of law. Where's our rule of law? And if we don't have a rule of law with common agreement among citizens about what's right, wrong, allowed, and not allowed, then we're in big trouble. I think we're in big trouble. And I hope the judges will just really do absolutely everything that they can to put a stop to this, because using the poor as pawns is not nice. It's not good for society. It's not good for anybody. And it's going to hurt us a lot.
Well, I always find it just so sickening that people like Roosevelt, who wear their religion on their sleeve and pretend to be devout Christians, along with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who has shut down the legislative branch literally to protect pedophiles. And he's basically Hitler had to burn down the Reichstag in order to shut down his parliament and put in the Nazis in their place. I mean, Johnson has done it without firing a shot. He's so, and these good Christians, I don't understand how they. It's not as if they're standing by watching people go hungry. They're responsible for people going hungry. There are alternatives. There are choices.
Yeah, they could call Congress in, appoint that legislator, And then, but they're afraid that she's going to call on release of the Epstein files. I mean, one of the bizarre features of all of this is the role of the Epstein files in this. But you know what's in the Epstein files, because if it wasn't in there, people wouldn't be working so hard to make sure they don't get released. So it's, I mean, the politics of this are just absolutely astounding.
Right.
And lots of people are going to be hurt. And I think in the long run, this is really not a good thing. But hypocrisy, we're talking here power. This is about power. It's not about hypocrisy or Christianity. It's about power. And they have it.
Right, but they're supposedly or pretending to operate in the name of Jesus Christ, who ministered to the poor, and you know, it, it's the short of the Messiah coming back and purging the temple, as is the description in the Bible. I mean, I just see this as, as you say, the hypocrisy maybe doesn't count, but they derive some of their power from their Christian constituency, which again seems to be completely ignorant of the life and message of the prophet Jesus.
Well, I would say that no one has ever accused the Republicans of lacking in hypocrisy, and the Christian values are selective among this group of people. But this is about power.
Right.
Trump is about power. He's got it, and he's using it. But it's very hard to know how we're going to come out of this. I just hope it happens soon.
Well, Marion Nestle, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Marion Nestle, who's the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health Emerita at New York University, which she has chaired from 1988 to 2003. She holds a PhD in molecular biology and is an MPH in public health nutrition from the University of California, Berkeley, and formerly served as a senior nutrition policy advisor in the Department of Health and Human Services. And in 2023, she was awarded the Edinburgh Medal for Science and Society and is the author of Eat, Drink, Vote, an illustrated guide to food politics. And her latest book is What to Eat Now, the indispensable guide to good food, how to find it, and why it matters. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into the retention election in Pennsylvania that is going under the radar for the state Supreme Court, in which a billionaire, Jeff Yass, is trying to unseat three Democratic judges in order to deadlock the court to later bring about one-party plutocratic rule.
I know it may sound funny, with people everywhere running out of money. We just can't make it by ourselves. It is cold and the wind is blowing. We need something to keep us going. Mr. President,
welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Ryan Cooper, the senior editor of the American Prospect. He is the co-host of the Left Anchor podcast, as well as the author of How Are You Going to Pay for That? Smart Answers to the Dumbest Questions in Politics. And his latest article, The American Prospect, is The Republican Plot to Turn Pennsylvania into Hungary. Welcome to Background Briefing, Ryan Cooper.
Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And this is an election going on today in Pennsylvania that's gone under the radar. And it's an election that's literally being funded by one billionaire who happens to be one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party, Jeffrey Yass. And what's he up to here? I mean, he's basically trying to get rid of the 5-2 Democratic majority on the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, and in the hope that he can kind of create a deadlock. Tell us about what his strategy is, and also why has this gone under the radar?
Well, so a little bit of background to start with. Back in 2010, the Republicans, swept the Pennsylvania, state elections. And as part of that Republican national strategy, this was right after the 2010 census, they did a big redistricting effort all across the country, but including Pennsylvania. And the result was a huge congressional gerrymander for the House districts that in 2012, despite the fact that President Obama won re-election, he won Pennsylvania by 5 points, and Bob Casey won re-election, a Democratic senator, by 9 points. The delegation was 13-5 Republican. So that's how many, they cheated their way to something like 4 or 5 extra seats just in Pennsylvania in the House of Representatives. And it's worth noting, actually, that if there had been fair maps in 2012, then Democrats would have won the House. They won the popular vote in the House in 2012. It was just because of this cheating that they kept their majority in 2012 with John Boehner, and folks remember those times. So since then, Democrats fought back. They swung the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and took a partisan majority there through judicial elections. And they got rid of that gerrymander. We've had fair maps since then, as well as they helped prevent Donald Trump from stealing our electoral votes in Pennsylvania in 2020. Dozens of other decisions, protecting various rights and so forth. And so what Yass and his Republican allies are trying to do is through these retention elections, which Pennsylvania has for judges, they can, come up for a sort of up down, do we give them another 10-year term? He's trying to get people to vote them out. And that would, in the first instance, make the court deadlocked so it couldn't decide on anything. That's good for Republicans. But then you'd open up a whole bunch of vacancies, and then they would try to win those vacancies with, a deluge of propaganda. And just to give you a taste of how dishonest the campaign has been here in Pennsylvania against these judges, that they're sending out these mailers that are accusing the Democrats on the court, these justices, of gerrymandering the state. And they have a picture of literally the Republican gerrymander that Republicans drew up in 2011 with this infamous district that people call Donald Kicking Goofy, that's like gerrymandered all the way across the 5 counties in the Philadelphia suburbs. A gerrymander that, at certain points was like 10 meters across. But anyway, just shameless lying. And we'll see. I voted this morning, but we'll see how the results come in.
And Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor, Josh Shapiro, and a Democratic House, but the Republicans control the Senate, right?
That's correct, yes. Just barely.
Right. But that would mean that if the three justices lose and the Senate declines to support the governor's interim picks, the court will be deadlocked, right? Isn't that the strategy on
Yeah.
the part of the ass and the billionaire funder?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you could break the majority and basically, handicap the court so it couldn't decide anything. And then, as soon as you can, you replace those with Republicans if you can do it. And I think the other thing I should mention is that, the Republican Party as a whole has gotten dramatically more extreme than it was in 2011, including in Pennsylvania. And so, like, the Pennsylvania Constitution has various rules about how the state districts are supposed to be drawn, not the national ones, but the state ones. And I would expect a future Republican, majority on the court to just completely ignore that, throw those out. I mean, this is not a party anymore that cares about legality at any level, and they will cheat everything they possibly can to maintain a permanent power, because that's what they do everywhere. It's what they've done historically and what they're doing right now across the country.
Well, in North Carolina, they have a right-wing so-called Christian theocrat as the Chief Justice. And it would seem to me that this is another attempt and to have that kind of, right-wing power and in the courts. And so talk to us about a little, if you will, Ryan, about your article's title is the Republican plot to turn Pennsylvania into Hungary. We know that the Republicans have used Orban as a model. Project 2025 was in part funded by Orban's Danube Foundation. And he's a huge hero amongst the Republican right and the Project 2025 people at Heritage. And he is obviously, a pal of Putin's and in Putin's pocket and altogether disgusting. He's actually a kleptocrat first, and that's never seems to be sufficiently publicized here. But why they have chosen him as their role model, I, for the life of me, don't know. So explain to me how the Orban is taking over Pennsylvania.
Well, my headline is a little bit silly, and arguably a little bit unfair to Hungary, because if you look at the way that Orban has, instituted a sort of quasi authoritarianism in Hungary, some the hammerlock that Republicans created in Wisconsin was quite a bit more extreme than that. So, I might actually be doing Viktor Orban a little dirty by comparing him to Republicans. It's like this guy at least has a little standard. But joking aside, I think that what you're seeing this mutual cross-pollination and inspiration between various right-wing, dictators and would-be dictators is that there is essentially a right-wing kind of international movement, like a movement of international solidarity between the various brands of fascism all around the world. You see it with how, Tucker Carlson going to Russia and marveling that they have a grocery store. Wow, nobody's ever seen that before. Or going to Hungary, and saying how it's so clean and everyone's so white and whatnot. But also with South America, Trump bailing out President Milei in Argentina from the consequences of his actions, sending him 20 billion dollars and counting, or was it 40? I've lost
Hmm.
count.
Right.
And even to the extent of helping them basically de facto secure soybean export markets, which are, a huge deal for American farmers. Be, like being more loyal to fellow foreign authoritarians than to his own hyper MAGA farm voter base. But it's, you see these guys have a mutual interest. They want to see the entire globe ruled by, authoritarian men.
Right, and the $40 billion to bail out Milei and the peso, the Argentine peso, that money is going to be lost. There's no way in the world that the Argentine peso, that the American taxpayer is ever going to be paid back. And it makes you realize the sickness of this, the priorities of Trump, because you got 1 in 8 Americans facing hunger, and the 40 billion that he's wasting to prop up Malay and the unproppable, if that's a word, Argentine peso could well be spent over here on feeding 1 in 8 Americans. You brought it up, so I wanted to follow through on the war in amongst the Republicans, which they really have a Nazi problem with Tucker Carlson cozying up to the young Nazi Nick Fuentes, and it's extraordinary that here's Trump tweeting out today about radical left Democrats in trying to shut down the food stamp program. Again, he's the rhetoric against Democrats is just so over the top. But I don't see people focusing sufficiently on the Nazi problem within the Republicans. They really do have a lot of Nazis in their ranks. And the idea that Carlson could sit down with this young Nazi and dignify him is pretty disgusting.
Yeah, it's terrifying, honestly. Like how quickly that this guy has been mainstreamed. As recent as I think it was 2022. I forget where exactly, but there was a big scandal about some association with, Fuentes had with a Republican politician, and the guy had to apologize and step down and so on. And now he's like just becoming totally normalized, a regular pundit, one voice among many. And I think that's down to a few things. You have Trump's just like supernatural ability to get the media to just shrug at everything that Republicans do, regardless of what it is. They're just like, oh yeah, well, it's baked in, it's baked in, it's baked in. We can't do it. We can't have a scandal. Meanwhile, we're going to have a week-long freak out because when Zoran Mamdani said aunt, he meant his mother's cousin, or father's cousin, but I digress. And then I think also a big important factor in this is what Elon Musk has done to Twitter. That has become the de facto conservative messaging platform with the way that Elon has, gotten rid of, in fact, not gotten rid of moderation, but to make it pro-Nazi, to kick out people who are not right-wing enough and to expose them to danger in terms of doxing and harassment and criminality. We've seen that recently. And he's just turned it into a neo-Nazi sewer. And this is where Republicans are hanging out all the time. They're on there several hours a day, just full-on addicts. You look at the people who are running the Department of Homeland Security account. I mean, these are, I would guess, at least some of them are Nick Fuentes followers. The Groypers are running these accounts, posting obscure Nazi memes all the time.
Right.
And
Well, but you've
it's
got we were just talking about Orban. Orban's close ties to the Heritage Foundation and particularly to Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation. His best buddy, of course, is J.D. Vance, who wrote the foreword to Kevin Roberts' new book. Now Roberts has come out in defense of Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes. So it's not just the groypers and the lowlifes and the bottom feeders and the sort of traditional Nazi scumbags like the brown shirts, but these are guys in suits and ties, and one of them is a vice president of the United States.
absolutely. I would bet my left arm that JD Vance is in group chats with a lot of these, neo-Nazis of various descriptions. He's constantly making excuses for them. And I mean, yeah, to your point, I mean, it's not really the case that like Fuentes and his cadre of previously fringe freaks, are marginal. It's that the whole party has moved in their direction, that all of the formerly buttoned down business conservatives, Columbia graduates who you'd think would just be voting to protect their trust funds and their future inheritances. No, they're all in on online neo-Nazism, Holocaust denial, the rest of it. They'll either believe it or make excuses for it. And I think that a lot of people in this country don't realize how far it's gotten, but that's where one of our two parties is at.
So does that mean because the Democrats are being accused of all kinds of ridiculous, extreme labels coming from the co-president Stephen Miller and from Trump himself, radical leftists, and of course, so many people on the Democratic left wish it was more radical, and it's certainly not a radical party. Why don't they make it clear who the real radicals are? These goddamn Nazis that are in the ranks of the Republican Party and in the White House.
Yeah, you would think it's kind of one of those things I've come to call a self-censoring fact, not a phrase I invented, but to normal people who haven't really clocked in with what's happened over the last 3 years, as the whole Republican elite has boiled their brains on Twitter, it just sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to, normie, not political people, the people who decide elections, to talk about all the obscure, you know incredibly racist neo-Nazi stuff that these guys are posting all the time. And the idea that it's incomprehensible. People couldn't imagine that this could happen here, but it is. It's happening here right now. And Democrats need to make some noise about it, but I think also they need to build up, alternative communications platforms, sort of alternate media or build up their own social media platforms as Zoran Mamdani has done to communicate with people directly. Because the one thing you can be sure is that the mainstream media is not going to report this out. The New York Times, all the rest of them, they compulsively normalize Republicans. They downplay their extremism, And they're going to do it with Fuentes too. There's going to be a soft profile focus of Nick Fuentes in the New York Times. You could set your watch by it within a year.
Well, Ryan Cooper, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Ryan Cooper, who's the senior editor at the American Prospect and the co-host of the Left Anchor podcast, as well as the author of How Are You Going to Pay for That? Smart Answers to the Dumbest Questions in Politics. And his latest article at the American Prospect is The Republican Plot to Turn Pennsylvania into Hungary. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back discussing how the Mamdani race in New York City and the Mikey Sherrill race in New Jersey are the personification of the struggle within the Democratic Party.
History will repeat itself. Crisis point, we're near the hour. Counterforce will do no good. Hot US, I feel your power. Hitler proves that funky stuff. It's not for you and me, girl. No. Europe's in happy land. They've had their fascist growth thing. Brothers, sisters, you live in the fascist growth thing. Brothers, sisters, you don't need that fascist growth thing.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Dr. Ashley Koning, who is the director of the Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling in New Jersey and a professor in the Political Science Department at Rutgers University. Dr. Koning has authored several book chapters, including one in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Political Decision Making. She also serves as the education chair for the American Association of Public Opinion Research Executive Council and recently served as the president of their executive council. Welcome to Background Briefing, Dr. Ashley Koning.
Thank you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you're in New Jersey, and all eyes are on New Jersey and New York. And New Jersey and New York are very different places, right?
Yeah.
New Jersey is sort of the bedroom community for New York. So expecting Mikey Sherrill, who's running for the governor there, to be, in love with Mamdani, like so many people in New York are, is asking for too much, is it not?
Yeah, it is. I think these are two very different types of Democrats and really at either end of the spectrum. You have Sherrill, who has touted herself since coming in on the blue wave in 2018 as a moderate. You have Mamdani in a much more progressive direction on this Democratic spectrum. And so, Mamdani has explicitly endorsed Sherrill and has sent his support over the Hudson. Sherrill has kind of, her verdict is still out, she claims, on Mamdani, and she's been very cautious and measured in how she responds about him, given the electorate that she is trying to get to elect her.
Well, it also must have something to do with her Republican opponent, Chattarelli, trying to tie her to Mamdani. That's what he does on the stump all the time.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a number of boogeymen in this race for New Jersey, right? I mean, in both races on either side of the Hudson, we have the issue of President Trump and the shadow that he creates, the very, very significant shadow in both races. For New Jersey, we have the shadow of Governor Phil Murphy, the current governor. And then Mamdani is even somewhat of a boogeyman for Sherrill when it comes to, her New Jersey race, because it's an easy shortcut for her Republican opponent, Jack Ciattarelli, to tie her to in order to portray her as someone who's more progressive to voters and to try to get their vote because of that. So it's someone she doesn't necessarily want to be tied with, much like she doesn't want to be tied necessarily with the current governor in New Jersey. And so it's something she's backed away from throughout the campaign.
Well, I find it hard to believe that Democrats are in trouble anywhere in this cycle, given what's happening and with Trump's favorability polls tanking. And so much is just outrageous that's happening to the country. Many people are upset about this massive ballroom and all this sort of Great Gatsby parties he's throwing while kids are going to be hungry. I mean, there's an awful lot out there that you'd think could motivate Democrats and somehow unite them to, not be divided between the sort of Mamdani wing and the Sherrill wing. So are we going to be surprised tomorrow in the sense that it should be a blowout?
when we're looking at New York City, we know that it's going to be a Democrat either way. It's just kind of which direction the Democratic Party goes in, but every sign is pointing towards Mamdani, obviously. With Sherrill, it's a little more complicated there. While there is, of course, the political national landscape in the context of a second Trump administration, that is perhaps the best thing on Democratic candidate Mikey Sherrill's side right now because New Jersey is actually quite a purple state when it comes to the governor's office. We have flipped back and forth a countless number of times, electing Chris Christie, Christine Todd Whitman, and Tom Kean, who are all famous Republican governors from the state and have been seen on the national stage at times as well. And New Jersey is one of those states that goes with the ideological mood swings. We may have voted since the Bill Clinton years for the Democratic candidate, in droves when it comes to the presidential level. But when we look at state and local politics, it's much different. And so it would have been without this second Trump administration, likely Chitterelli's to lose. He likely would have had this entire race in the bag. And because of the national context, I think we see a very different picture. And it works in tremendous favor to Sherrill, particularly because there have been a lot of internal murmurs throughout her own party about how she really is lacking the enthusiasm with voters and perhaps she needs to be taking more stances on issues. And so it really is that Trump factor for her that is likely, compelling voters to the polls to vote against Chitterelli, knowing that really, if we don't have a Democratic governor in the state, for many, that would be the end of the firewall that New Jersey has against the Trump administration. So it really does become a race with state and national implications of whether or not New Jerseyans want a friendlier relationship with the Trump administration or if they still want that barrier and a Democrat who will fight him.
Well, it's not as if the Trump administration is friendly towards New Jersey. The OMB head, Russ Vought, just axed an $18 billion funding for the Gateway Tunnel, which is the rail link between New Jersey and New York. And it's, over 100 years old, and it's could be an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is another large feather in Cheryl's cap here, and it does no favors for Chitterelli whatsoever with this decision of pulling the funding for the Gateway Tunnel coming down rather recently. I mean, honestly, it's unfortunately a big blow to Chitterelli's campaign because this is something, and Sherrill has been known the entire campaign to tie everything back to Trump, and sometimes has been criticized for that instead of focusing on the Garden State. But this is a direct impact upon New Jersey that the Gateway Tunnel has. New Jerseyans have expressed concern over the Hudson River rail tunnels for years. They're what connect New Jersey and New York. It is the lifeblood of the Northeast corridor here between New York City, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and DC. And we're the ones that partially house these river tunnels. So New Jerseyans understand how important they are. They are concerned about their structure and the soundness of their structure, and they very well know that they are key to the economic well-being and to the job proliferation of droves of New Jerseyans. So taking that funding away does nothing for Chitterelli and just gives a very important point for Sherrill to score on by showing how directly Trump is impacting the Garden State.
So what's going on with Nate Silver, who a lot of people follow his predictions? He's just said that Sherrill, MAGA opponent, could win, and went on to say, "Is New Jersey the next swing state?" Where is that coming from? Where's the evidence? Nate Silver suggests that, in spite of the lead, now it's clear that Mikey Sherrill's lead has gone down. But where does he get this notion that the Republican's going to win?
Yeah, I think there are all eyes on this race throughout the country, but much like any state or local race, someone from the outside doesn't necessarily understand the dynamics of Jersey politics unless they live here. And there was quite a national narrative in 2024 when Harris won by only 6 points when she won the state, that all of a sudden New Jersey was turning red. And while we do see some redder turnout in 2024, there was also depressed turnout, frankly, in some of the areas that, Harris sorely needed. And she did not make the gains that Biden had made in 2020 simply because a lot of Democrats stayed home and were disenchanted. And so I think that's a very big question in terms of turnout versus actual realignments and shifts. And so I think we need to be careful until we see what happens here in this election in terms of how we frame all of that. I mean, uh, again, New Jersey is a very purple state also when it comes to state and local elections. So for us in New Jersey, this is not abnormal. It is not abnormal to see a moderate Republican strike a competitive race against a Democrat or win. I mean, we just have to go back within the same decade to Chris Christie when he had skyrocketing approval and favorability post Hurricane Sandy, leading into a landslide of a reelection. And this was prior to all of the Bridgegate scandal. So he was beloved across the aisle in the state. And so I think, it's hard for many to grasp that concept. And also remembering that New Jersey was once a toss-up decades and decades ago. Every state goes through different iterations of what they are considered ideologically throughout the history of our country. And so, it certainly fuels a narrative about this blue state turning redder. But I don't think we know the end of that narrative yet until we see what happens today. I also think we need to recognize that the polls have been all over the place in the state. We've had a number of different pollsters come in the state, and then we've had native New Jersey pollsters like ourselves as well at the Rutgers Eagleton poll. And, we have everything from a virtual dead heat to 9 points, +9 for Sherrill. And so the average right now is +3 for Sherrill. She's led in every poll. She is, has a high probability in the betting market. She has had fundraising on her side. She has had early voting on her side. I mean, through election day voting, Republicans have a really tall mountain to climb right now to get over the negative 300,000 approximate votes that they're in the hole with when it comes to early voting, whether in mail or in person. So, I think we need to be cautious about putting narratives and spin on it, especially, when individuals are not from New Jersey or down here on the ground in New Jersey. It's like any state, politics, local politics are complicated to understand.
Well, if you go back a long way in our politics to Jack Kennedy debating Nixon, it turned out to be all about who was telegenic and who was not. And clearly, there are some telegenic and talented people that have been elected, and others who aren't, just simply through no fault of their own, just don't come across very well. And Micah Sherrill is certainly not charismatic, where Mamdani is in spades, as was Obama, who campaigned for her over the weekend, and Clinton, and of course Ronald Reagan, a former actor. So in many ways, it seems unfair that you have to be telegenic no matter what your policies are. So it just seems a little unfair to expect her to be like Mamdani.
Yeah, and I mean also she comes from a very different background, right? I mean she comes from a naval background. She was a Navy pilot, as she touts in all of her advertisements. She comes from being a congresswoman for several cycles now, and is used to dealing with things at a federal level and being very careful and cautious in how she approaches answers. And again, that has certainly been a criticism from her campaign and the lack of enthusiasm and the lack of a, perhaps larger than life personality. Chitterelli has a little bit of that Chris Christie, New Jersey tough guy flair, where he's more practiced on the debate stage for governor because let's face it, this is his third time running, his second time as the nominee within New Jersey. And also, he is a Jersey guy. He has that kind of brash New Jersey persona that New Jerseyans actually enjoy. I mean, this is what saw two successful terms for Chris Christie until Bridgegate collapsed his entire reputation. So, and Chitterelli really tries to sell himself on that too, that he is a Jersey guy with a 100-year legacy here, and that Sherrill is a transplant. And you can sometimes tell whether he mocks her for not knowing Taylor ham versus pork roll, which, is a cute, important battle here in the state. Whether he talks about her not knowing certain places in the state other than her own district. I mean, down to her very accent of, having an accent from her home state instead of, sounding like a New Jerseyan.
Mm.
Optics are everything, and those can really affect someone's candidacy and someone's chances at success. But again, it's the Trump of it all that may, pun intended, trump these kind of typical factors that we see play into, and frankly, Trump in the economy, may trump other factors that we see play into victories and losses.
So, how much then is this race and the New York race, as in fact, you're quoted in an article saying this is like the perfect personification of the struggle that the Democratic Party is going through. In other words, the liberal wing versus the centrist wing. I don't understand why they have to be mutually exclusive. And it obviously is a real challenge for the Democrats to particularly find a leader that can bridge that divide. But how much do you see this as really at the heart of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, these two candidates definitely embody the separate wings of the Democratic Party. And, New Jersey is much more of a microcosm of the country than New York City is. We have one of the highest immigrant populations. We have one of the most diverse populations. And actually, our demographics are a pretty good mirror of the country as a whole. New York City is a very different beast. And very different demographically, depending especially upon what borough you're looking at. So I would say New Jersey is kind of a more representative test of what kind of Democrat plays well in an election cycle. And so, I think it really does pit these two different ideas against one another. And surely Mamdani is going to still be held up as this kind of shadow or boogeyman in the midterms for Republicans to point to for those who are still uneasy with democratic progressivism. And he's a very easy shortcut to galvanize a party base and to sway those middle of the road independents. Sherrill is much more a candidate that leans towards the middle and moderates towards the middle. And the Democrats have to decide nationally which playbook, if both of these candidates win tonight, they need to decide which playbook is going to play better across the country. And frankly, maybe it's a different playbook per race. But
Right.
I think it'll give them an idea, nevertheless, of what works and what doesn't as they head into 2026.
Well, just in closing, it's also, I think, what will be interesting is how the Latino vote, which has been trending Republican, how that's going to play out because of the outrageous behavior of ICE across the country. And it'll be worth watching. I know Chitterelli has tried to go after that vote, but at the same time, you've got so many people of Latino heritage in this country having to carry their passports with them and living in fear. So it'll be interesting to know whether the numbers will reflect a drop off of support amongst Latinos for Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, and the big question here, especially, is Passaic County. That was something that came into play in 2024, and Latinos in Passaic County, that county actually flipping for Trump in 2024, and mirroring that national trend of, a surge in Latino support for Trump, and frankly, specifically among Latino males. So I think that's something to definitely watch throughout the state if Chitterelli is able to keep chipping away at that. And that's certainly been quite a leading story, but he has to do a balancing act between, does he want to make more inroads with higher income voters and suburban and white voters, and more highly educated voters like he chipped away with in 2021? Or does he want to follow Trump's roadmap of making inroads with lower income, non-white, Hispanic, non-college educated voters that proved successful for the president? So, Chitterelli either needs to magically combine some combination of that, or he needed to either focus on one block of those, one swath of those voters or the other in his GOTV efforts in these past weeks.
It'll also be clear how much Latino voters in this country are moving away from the Republicans because of the appalling treatment of their fellow citizens or non-citizens by ICE, which is obviously offending a lot of people in this country, not just Latinos. So that's what I was thinking would be an important thing to watch. I thank you for joining us, Dr. Ashley Koning.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Dr. Ashley Koning, who's the director of the Eagleton Center for Public Interest Polling in New Jersey and a professor in the Political Science Department at Rutgers University. Dr. Koning has authored several book chapters, including one in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Political Decision Making. She also serves as the education chair for the American Association for Public Opinion Research Executive Council and previously served as the president of their Executive Council. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305